In 1989, there was a 19-year-old American soldier standing in West Germany before the fall of the Berlin Wall, before the collapse of the Soviet Union. He was standing at the border, what was known as the Iron Curtain. It was a big mesh fence that was really tall, and there were guard towers all the way down this for miles and miles. And to his left was East Germany, and to his right, right in front of him, was Czechoslovakia. And on the Czechoslovakia side was Czechoslovakian guard soldiers, as well as Russian soldiers and overseers and KGB. And as this young soldier stood there, he noticed another young soldier standing right across the fence from him. And for some reason, the soldier started wondering, I wonder if that guy's just like me. And so this young soldier, contrary to what his sergeant would have liked him to do, waved at the other soldier across the fence. And the young soldier across the fence waved back and smiled. And for a moment, two colliding forces saw each other in a different light. Now, I got a comment recently that really had me thinking. It wasn't a very nice comment, but I read it and I thought about it, and I thought, hey, let's go over this. I had a viewer ask, how could you develop things for the military and then all of a sudden care about the rest of us? You know, you were one of the people pushing all this tech, and now all of a sudden you care. And I thought about that, and I had a really simple answer. I mean, I had a very short answer to it, because I just thought and I said, I don't regret it at all. I do not regret designing things for the military. Now, before we get started, my name is Sean. I have a background in tech, and yes, I used to design and build autonomous robotic devices for the military. And I've owned my own software company for the last 23 years. Now, I need to take you back in time just a little bit to see where I'm going with this. Now, I grew up in the early years in Minnesota, pretty much around white kids all the time. And there's some about white kids in cornfields that make them kind of mean. So I was really nerdy. I was into everything. I loved archaeology, geology, electrical, electronics, engineering, astronomy. Every single subject I was just crazy about. Even home ec, when we were supposed to bake cookies, I was like, yeah, let's bake cookies. And when we had to sew backpacks with sewing machines, I was like, yeah, I'm going to make the best backpack ever. And I got it done so quick, I made a backpack, and I made duffel bags, and I made all kinds of other things. I was excited. I was really, really excited about every single subject. And that set me apart, because that's not a real popular way to be when you're around other kids. And to make matters worse, I was really tiny. I was much tinier than everybody. I was one of the tiniest people in the class. And so, as you can imagine, you get picked on. You know, going to school was kind of survival. But anyway, let's fast forward. My mom is a Minnesota Norwegian. My mom's people that she comes from are very, very friendly. They will invite you in for dinner and feed you and everything, and it doesn't matter who you are. Very loving people. That's my mom's side. And those Minnesota goodbyes, those Norwegian goodbyes could take a half hour. When you say goodbye, it's a half hour before you leave. But that's that side. And my dad, he grew up in Arizona. He is not a Norwegian. But my dad's an inventor. He was a metal worker. His father was a metal worker. And so we're up in Minnesota, and something happened to my dad, real traumatic. He ended up in the hospital, almost died, and he just decided, I can't take Minnesota anymore. You know, my parents met in college. They left during college. They didn't finish, but all of a sudden, you know, when I was relatively young, he's like, we need to move back south again. So we ended up moving to Silver City, New Mexico. And I was this blonde-haired little kid with a heavy, heavy Minnesota accent. And so I ended up going to this high school. It was over half Hispanic people. It was what they would call Chicanos, which were like Mexican American. And, you know, there was a lot of different things. I had no idea about any of it. I showed up down there and I just thought everyone's people. I had no idea about racism until later in my life, but here I am and a big old smile on my face, and I'm ready to hang out with everybody. But it wasn't easy to make friends. And ironically, there was this kid, and I can't tell you the gang name for it because they say it's derogatory, but everybody in high school knew the Hispanics, and a lot of the Hispanics didn't say, you know, they didn't call themselves Hispanic. They said, we're Mexican American. But anyway, there was this kid named Lorenzo, and he was friends with everybody that drove a lowrider. And for some reason, they all took me in. It was really bizarre, but I just looked at everybody like they're people. I didn't know any better. And so here I am, this really tiny blonde-haired kid, and I'm riding in lowriders. That's the first time I had seen a steering wheel that small, like a little chain welded together, and they're able to steer with that. Man, it was cool. It was fun. And that was the first year that I was there. And interestingly enough, I never got picked on. And I always thought everyone was friendly, but I only realized later is because nobody really wanted to mess with them, and they were protecting me for some reason. But anyway, so as I walked through the school, I was so tiny that most people thought of me as a prodigy. They thought I skipped a bunch of grades and was going to head into college, you know, really early. And by the way, my brother actually did. My brother went to college in high school, but not me. So anyway, once again, I'm still nerdy, getting a 4.0 in school. I was into everything. I mean, I was president of the chess club. I was in distributive education clubs of America and things like that. I loved everything. I was so excited about everything. But, you know, when it came time to graduate, I got accepted to New Mexico State for electrical engineering. Electrical engineering was my absolute first love. But I also loved geology so much, so I got accepted to New Mexico Tech. And I wanted to be accepted I wanted to study everything. I was so excited about every subject there is. I was really into paleontology and archaeology. I would lay up at night thinking of space and astronomy. I would think of everything. I was constantly going. And a lot of people said, do you ever slow down? Do you ever stop? And I was so hyper. I was so excited about everything. I was a deep thinker, even as a kid. And so it was a struggle trying to decide what the heck I was going to do. And then later I was accepted to Arizona State University. Later to find out people go there to party mostly. But the problem I had is we grew up poor. And we lived in such a tiny house when I was growing up. It was like a little mobile home, you know, like a 1960s mobile home. And my dad had to turn sideways to go down the hall. We had no money. And then finally, my dad in the 1980s invented a tool. And the tool started making money. So their income started going up, but we weren't rich. So when I started applying for colleges, I got some scholarships, but they weren't free ride scholarships. I didn't get scholarships because when I applied, I was the wrong skin color. And then when they checked my parents' income for some reason, even though I was going to leave home, my parents' income disqualified me. So, guess what happened? I joined the Army. I went in, I'm like, I'm getting that college money. And that was my mentality. And little did I know how much the Army was going to change my life. You know, I graduated high school, and then Halloween night, the recruiter picked me up and took me down to El Paso to process in. I'd already been accepted in the Army. It's just Halloween night is actually when I started shipping off to basic training. And those of you who have been in the military, you get off that bus and man, what, the yelling begins. They start screaming at you and you got to run and everything. And I just remember sitting there in this big old room and we had our heads shaved. We had our uniforms on. We had camouflage on. And I'm sitting there and this drill sergeant was going back and forth and just screaming at us, yelling at us, insulting us. And I looked around, kind of scared. And I was just like, what in the heck did I do? What did I get myself into? But you know what? I was a very athletic person. And by the way, just to backtrack a little bit, in the 11th grade in Silver City, I grew nearly 1 foot in 1 year. It was just this record growth spurt I had. So I went from this tiny kid who they called Wormser from Revenge of the Nerds. If any of you guys seen that, they thought I was like Wormser, the little kid. I grew a foot. So then all of a sudden I'm the same size as everybody. So in the Army, I really had it. I guess I had a decent time there. It was really tough, but I actually enjoyed being pushed. I ate it up. Not everything was great, but I was so into all the academic stuff that it was amazing being physical. So I got shipped over to Germany and was stationed over there. And at that time, the way we all grew up in the 1980s was we were in this Cold War with the Soviet Union. They had so many nuclear weapons pointed at us, and we had so many pointed at them. And it was just a matter of somebody saying something wrong, and it could have just destroyed the world. I don't know anybody who could really survive it because you have all these countries bombing each other, and the next thing you know, this cloud of radiation's going over everywhere. So in the 1980s, we lived like we're dying. And that's probably why some of the best music and movies and things came out of the 1980s, because people just live like they're dying. But here I am in Germany, and I get over there and I realize the cold reality. I see on the East German side, people were wanting to escape that, but they had these guard towers up, and I just thought it was weird because I thought, well, you got all these guard towers. Are those for us? And no, they said it was for the people on the other side if they want to try to escape. There was a lot of stuff going on when I was there. And so that story I told you in the very beginning was me. When I went over to the Iron Curtain and I looked over across the way, I understood in all our training that these people on the other side will have no problem coming over and killing us. And our side, We have to do the same. But you know, when I was over there and I just looked across, because most of the time you see pictures and we study training manuals and all these things, but then I went over there and and just looked across, and I'm thinking, I wonder if that kid is just like me. Maybe his family needed some money and he just joined, or maybe he's required to do it. So I had a moment there. I had a moment where no matter how evil you think someone sounds, there they are. And then you start realizing we're all just pawns in the game. Now, I was in the military, and overall, I would say if I had to do it again, I would do it again. I would have no problem doing it again. But the problem that occurred was then my kids grew up here, 4 kids, and they all wanted to join the military, especially when our oldest boy did. We went over to basic training, and he made them so proud. And every single one of them joined the military. And little did I know that that's going to really be terrible. Not terrible because they joined the military, but things are going to happen. And so here I am, just not to get off on the kids yet, but when the kids were little, I worked for a defense contractor, and we did build technology and test it, especially down at the Yuma Proving Grounds, and we did some DARPA contracts and things like that. Very familiar with that stuff. Any of you guys who say, you should check out DARPA, I was in the middle of this stuff, So a lot of the projects I worked on were really cool. I didn't work on a lot of, weapon systems, but I worked on other things that were really cool. Some of them I explained in my other videos. We were dumping stuff out of the back of military aircraft under a parachute and soft landing it. And we were doing autonomous guidance parachute loads that would steer their way around mountains and things like that and land. And then the Apache helicopter landing gear to help soften the blow if the helicopter came down really fast and crashed or came down hard. It was to help save lives. And I was very, very good at calculating G's and acceleration, using accelerometers and programming microchips to do it. And you know what? If I had to do it over again, I'd still do it. I have no problem whatsoever having that background. I have no moral dilemma with it, just to let you know. And I'm not saying that to be arrogant, but the way I look at the world is this, and it really comes from me being such a history buff on top of every other subject that I studied. And by the way, when I was a kid, when other kids were out playing, we had the Encyclopedia Britannica. I had 2 sets of them, one from the 1950s and one from the 80s or something like that. And I read those encyclopedias cover to cover and then started over again. I just kept reading them over and over again. I was so fascinated by everything. One of the things that I was really, really fascinated by was history. Not just American history. I was fascinated by world history. And those who are not as familiar with history, when you look into it, you realize humanity, men, they're always at war. There's always seems to be an army. There always seems to be a conflict. Even when I researched Native Americans before the Europeans even came here, they were at war. Not all of them, but they were attacking each other. There's plenty of evidence of that. And then in Europe, And one of the most crazy the place you really, really know that has just had conflict for a very long time is the Middle East. I don't know if there'll ever be peace there. According to the Bible, there will be. But it's hard to imagine these guys all getting along. There's such deep-seated hatred. So I'm a realist. I want peace. I want there to be a tranquil world. But I'm not naive enough to think there will be. If man is left to his own thoughts, his own devices, and some of you would say greed and all the other stuff, then there's going to be armies and there's going to be war. And you say, well, why would you be in an army? I truly believe that when there's a push, there's a push back. There has to be a balance. If there's another country that is set to stand up against you or to invade you, then either you're going to get invaded like France every time, or you're going to have an army and you're going to stand up. And it's just like if somebody broke into my house right now and they threaten my family. They're probably not going to survive that. But I don't hate people. I don't hate, even when you're in the military, I just don't have the hatred for the other side. A lot of them are just like the rest of us, just being marched toward each other. I don't like that, but that's the way it's been since the beginning of time. And there's that saying, you're a soldier and you don't hate the people in front of you that you're standing against. You do it because you love the people behind you. You're being a shield for the people that you love. Now, when I was growing up in Silver City, I had two best friends. One friend, his name was Mauro, and Mauro was born in Juarez, Mexico. And Mauro and I really got along great. And my other friend, Peter, there's three of us, and we were a little bit odd because when everyone else went out partying and stuff like that, we went out hiking, exploring. My friend Peter was a musician. We'd go jam out with him. And so here we were, the three of us. I kind of came from a conservative background. My friend Peter came from more of a left background, and a lot of peace activists and things like that in their group. And Mauro was just enjoying America. And he had a lot of dreams and everything like that. And so here I was in high school, and it was weird how three friends can give so much to each other's perspective. Peter and I, we talked last night for probably an hour and a half. I mean, I've been friends with him since we were young. And it's amazing how from his background, where they were always protesting wars and everything, in my background, they were supporting the troops. But yeah, when we went out, we somehow listened to each other. We didn't change into each other, but we were able to give each other enough respect and really have a lot of fun together. And so, I had sort of a balanced view of everything. And then my mom, she's so nice to everybody. That ended up in me. And so when I look at the enemy, the so-called enemy, I see people. I just see people. And I think some of the most evil things in the world are the ones who actively try to deceive everybody and the ones who take a life and really enjoy it. That's the difference. If I had to go to war, I would take lives. I wouldn't enjoy it. I actually would grieve for them. It's not a good thing. And you guys do understand that the general population is not in control of these things. It only takes less than 1/3 of the population to control the entire population. You realize that? It only takes 3 people out of 100 to control everybody. 3 people out of 100 can control the other 97. Because those 3 people can be convincing enough to get quite a few of them to follow them militantly, and then the rest are kind of caught up in it. We have to come to a reality here of we're kind of powerless to control things until things change from higher above. And I was raised Christian, and I do believe in God, but I have a real hard time with organized religion. I have been to so many churches. And I'm just tired of the division, things like that. But nevertheless, I'm not going to tell you guys to believe in God. I'm only going to say it because I've had plenty of things in my life happen that unmistakably God was involved, a creator. And so that's just my perspective. Some of you guys have never had that happen. I do not blame you for not believing in God. I just don't. And if you believe differently than me, I don't blame you. But here I am. I'm a soldier, and then I get out and I design stuff for the military. And I have no problem with that. And then my kids grow up. They all go in the military. My oldest boy goes to Afghanistan, and he saw horrors. I mean, we knew he was in trouble when he finally got a chance to call. He actually called upon arrival, and he said there was an arm and a leg laying there and everything, and we knew he was in a bad spot. Other people I knew went to Afghanistan, and they were what's called in the rear with the beer. They were in artillery units, and they were a little further back. Well, my oldest boy was on a remote outpost where they took incoming all the time. And he really had it tough. And then the rest of my kids go in, and many of them got deployed other places. And so my oldest boy, because of that war, he is dead. And then to make matters worse, we lost another one. Here's the dog tags. My daughter died because of that war. So I've got 2 kids left. They're doing good, as well as can be expected. But I have to tell you guys, a lot has shaped me. And it's very hard for me to really believe a lot of things that are thrown at me. I take things into consideration. But when it seems like when people blurt things out, the louder they yell things out, the less I believe them. But the people that think about what they're saying and respectfully talk about what they know and what they think, I really appreciate that. But a lot has molded me. And it's, I have my own view of different things. I don't know about everything. But I've had people tell me things they saw in the news about Afghanistan and try to tell me what's going on over there. And here my boys over there getting shot at. And it's really hard for me to hear from people that don't know. They just hear this stuff, and now the world has gotten worse. Truth is hard to find. But see, I studied so much, and I went out. I was so into geology and archaeology, paleontology. I went out and I was always asking questions like, why are they finding mammoth bones in New Mexico? Why in New Mexico? Why out here is they're finding bones from the giant sloth, the giant ground sloth? Everything must have been different. The climate must have been much, much more different. There must have been more oxygen to support such large creatures. I was always thinking. And so anytime somebody blurts at me and says, we need to stop doing this or that so we can save the earth, I just have a bigger perspective of it. I'm really into everything. Cosmic catastrophes, supervolcanoes going off, things like that. I just look at it all. I look at everything as it's changing. And now, here I am. My oldest boy died. And then, right after that, my best friend Mauro was killed when an old guy went to pass a bunch of people and hit him and his wife and his little boy head on in a car. And my friend Mauro and his youngest boy died. So what was weird is I just got done talking to Mauro, because Mauro and I, we talked constantly. And when I say we checked in with each other. I mean, he left Silver City and he went to New York City. He taught math and science in the Bronx. And then he moved back to Casper, Wyoming, and he was a very well-respected teacher. So all of a sudden, I lose my boy and I lose my best friend. And so Peter and I, we flew up to Wyoming to go to his funeral. Not only that, I spoke at his funeral in front of a big auditorium of people. And Peter was a musician, so he played and sang. But when Mauro died, something in me snapped. And I don't know if it snapped, but instantly I lost my fear of death. I had no fear whatsoever. And it was tested because I got on a plane, Las Vegas, Nevada, flew over to Denver, and we're going to drive up to Casper. And there was a very, very big storm. It was the most violent aircraft ride I'd ever been on. I'd never been on one where we were thrown around so badly. And Peter flew out of El Paso, and he was going up there. And it was very violent. In fact, we hit this front over the Rocky Mountains that was throwing us around so bad that the lady next to me, she put like marks on my arm from gripping me so hard. And I sat there with absolutely no fear of death. It wasn't like I wanted to die, but I just didn't fear it anymore. And to this day, it hasn't left. That feeling hasn't left. And so we did that. And then 2 years ago, I was out in the woods. You want to talk about something trying to take me out or hurt me. I was out in the woods and a pine tree fell on me. A pine tree came down and ripped my ear in half, and then a branch impaled me right in the neck. And I was by myself, and I got on my ATV and I drove 6 miles back here. And before I left, I couldn't get reception out there normally. Never get reception, but I just did a long shot. I was bleeding really bad, and I just typed a text to my wife. I said, injured badly. In fact, I'll show you the text. Here's the text. And I headed back on the ATV, driving 6 miles by myself through the woods, and I started blacking out about halfway. And I got back to the neighbor's house, and my wife showed up shortly after that. And her and I were EMT firefighters for 10 years here. We had been on so many calls. I had flown on helicopter, doing CPR on people. And my wife knew she better get me to the hospital quick, because the helicopter wouldn't even get there as quick. I had a stick sticking out of my neck. So we got over to Flagstaff, and I got to the counter of the hospital because she dropped me off. There's no parking in the ER. I hobbled in and I dropped to my knees. There was a full waiting room in the emergency room, and I knew exactly what to tell the person behind the desk. They said, "What do you have going on?" And I said, "I've been impaled in the neck." And he pushed a button and they came rushing out. And I spent 5 hours in the trauma bed over there in the ER while they were working on me. And the doctor came out and she told my wife, she said, "Your husband needs to go buy a lottery ticket, because that branch came 1 millimeter from hitting my carotid artery. And if that would have happened, I would have just bled out there. That would have been it." But you know, when I was laying there in the trauma bed, I had no fear. I just had no fear. And then I healed up from that. And then my daughter died. And that was a year and a half ago. And, that's the kind of stuff that molds me. I look back at my life. I've got some regrets. I'm not arrogant about it. I'm very humble. But I'm very realistic. So when I talk to everybody, I just want you to know that from my perspective, I just look at a bigger picture. Now, how does this relate to AI? Well, because I went through so much, and because I have a military background, because I've had all my kids serve, I understand that militaries are necessary until humans are able to have peace. And I don't think they can do that on their own. And some people have told me AI will bring peace, and I don't think so. I do not. But I look at the big picture, and right now, of all the weapon systems I've seen, and all the closed door military projects that I can't talk about, I see AI as being more impactful than the nuclear bomb. And what I'm noticing right now is there is a war going on. We just don't know we're in it. It doesn't mean we can go fight it, but right now, there is a thing going on that I'm going to be explaining to you guys. I have so many things to cover on AI with you. But in my time as a defense contractor, doing all these different things, including for DARPA, I have rubbed shoulders with those who work at NASA's JPL, people who work at Boeing, and many, many other places. And I can tell you there's a lot of good people, but there is a population, not a population, but there's quite a few people that would be considered in the nerd or geek group, that they had a rough upbringing. I mean, I can kind of relate. I can relate on how kids picked on me badly, especially in Minnesota. They didn't pick on me much in New Mexico, but in Minnesota, I got picked on real bad. And there are a lot of kids that are just outcasts, that are really nerdy or geeky or whatever. And I got to know quite a few of them, and I can tell you some of them have real bad mental issues. They have really bad mental problems. And now all of a sudden you give them billions of dollars, or they're working for a company that's creating these AI systems. And personally, when I've talked to some of these guys, they actually advocate for the end of the world. They would love to see humans wiped off. For some reason, they just fantasize about that. And a lot of these kids grew up on, playing the video games where they're mindlessly going around and shooting stuff or whatever they're doing. And so now all of a sudden we're in this world where instead of, like it used to be, in ancient times, it was the strong and the wise were the ones that were running things and causing the wars. And now all of a sudden, we got the nerds. And when I've spoken on some of these videos, I get some comments from some of these whack jobs that I knew quite well. And they call you normies. They call each one of you guys who are not them normies. It means you're normal. And they're not normal. And if you read their comments, they don't care about you. They would rather see really bad things happen to people. And some of them have like a utopian view or a dystopian view. It depends. But now all of a sudden, these guys got a lot of power. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just keep telling you what's going on. That's going to be my job on this channel. I'm not going to try to freak you out and make you think the world is ending. But I need to point a bunch of things out. And I have no fear. I have no fear whatsoever. And if you guys have a different opinion than I do, that's okay. That's okay. A lot of times when you guys comment, even if you disagree with me, I take things into consideration. Doesn't mean I change my mind, but I do take things into consideration. Because some people are a little further on the front lines of things than I am. I'm on the front lines of certain things, and other people are like right there. So, that's it for this video. This video is unlike any other video that I will do. Everything else is going to be very AI related and less about me. So that's it. And remember, for everything we gain, there is something lost. So, catch you later, guys.